Hey guys, I am back for a new tutorial, a new screencast just on editing, and I thought the last one I did with the edge masking stuff, I thought it was probably really helpful, but it probably glossed over, luminosity masking in general and kind of what it can do for you. So I thought I'd just go through an entire process of editing a photo because I need to edit a photo this morning, and this is one that I've been wanting to do. And or at least one of these is. I can't decide which one I want to do. I've got I like this one a lot with the dust foot, and I like this little kind of edge cloud scuddy hanging down there, but I also like these where the dust is a little further away and the downburst is real awesome. So it's a tough one to pick which one to edit. I think I like this one the best. And so I think we're going to go with this one. I'm going to, as a starting point, I'm probably going to go through and do profile correction, pick the, this was a Sigma lens, so I'm going to pick the Sigma 14-24, do chromatic aberration just in case there's any, pink fringing. I don't see any, or I guess I should say magenta fringing, but nothing there. Kind of got, I was bringing up the exposure. A lot of times I want to make my histogram real balanced, like if you have an image and it looks and the default is like this, your histogram is already to the right or all the way to the left, I want to maybe bring it up to kind of balance it before I go into editing in Photoshop. I'm going to check out my horizon, make sure it's straight. It looks a little crooked here, so I'm going to try to fix that, balance that out. Part of me feels like I didn't get enough foreground here, but I think it looks pretty good. The only thing I would think about is maybe doing like a 16:9 crop, which kind of gives it a wider feeling, and so I still could maybe do that. I can't decide, but we might just stick with this for now. So we're going to edit it in Photoshop, Smart Object, so we can change it if we want. We have lots of it. I don't know if we have lots of issues, but we do have like a big spot here we're going to have to get rid of, and there's obviously a bunch of dust spots as well. But I'm going to do this one like 100%, I believe, using luminosity masking, if it will ever open up in Photoshop. There we go, auto magic. I'm going to come in here, and before I get started, actually I like this. I did the smart object, but to even make changes to this, you kind of have to get rid of it. So I'm going to rasterize this layer, made a new one. Just kept the smart object in case I want to go back and start over. Smart object allows you to go back and make changes to the raw file, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's already good. So I'm going to just quickly, before I create luminosity masks, I'm going to go through and kind of get rid of some basic dust spots that I see that I can at least get rid of now. Sometimes when you're doing editing, if you have a camera with a lot of dust spots like mine, the dust spots will show up later. As you add more contrast, you'll realize they'll become just more visible, because the more the contrast you have, the more they kind of pop out. This right here is a little bit of a problem. You can see there's a round dust spot here. Now normally you could maybe try to select it all with a big dust removal, or I could do a lasso tool and kind of like highlight it and then do a content aware fill and just see what happens. Wow, that was actually pretty good. Not bad at all. There might be a little bit of an edge here. So sometimes I use like the clone stamp at like 30%, something low, and like select a different area to just kind of blend it in a little bit better, make it look pretty even. But that's actually worked really, really well. So that's a miracle, true miracle. Sometimes that doesn't, content aware is glorious, and then sometimes it doesn't work that great. So getting rid of these dust spots, I think that's pretty good for now. So this was a really awesome storm. This was we actually saw a couple brief tornadoes, landspout tornadoes right around here before the downburst really happened. And then this was just happened right in front of us, and it was incredible. So luminosity masking is they're masks to help you, edit an image using the tonality of the image. It's a pretty interesting, difficult kind of concept to, I think, understand. I'll do my best to explain it. This guy Tony Kuiper, You can look it up. Tony, his last name is Kuyper. He has all kinds of tools to help you create luminosity masking. He has different panels that go right into Photoshop. This is an action that I got a long time ago. This is 2008 to 2010. I very much like how simple it is and easy, and I just select all masks and hit play, and it's going to create all my luminosity masks, and then those get tossed into this channels tab. So these are all the luminosity masks, and so if I click on them, you can kind of see what they are masks that have the tonality of the image. So these are like super lights, where this mask, everything that's like kind of light and white is where this mask is targeting. And so the way I try to describe what a luminosity mask is you're using, let's just say I wanted to just do this, like let's say a level adjustment, right? I'm gonna add some contrast with this level adjustment, and I'm going to hit invert, which makes it basically disappear. And what I do is I have a mask that's black, and I'm going to paint with a brush. I'm going to open my brush up and paint in this effect. And this is just a global adjustment, right? I'm using my brush. You can see that this mask is now like 50%, 60% gray. I've painted in the effect everywhere, okay? Now, what a luminosity mask does is if I create my little effect again, my level adjustment, and I invert my mask, and I go and select like the darks, where you see it's really light in the dark areas, that's where it's going to paint. This actually is an intermediary layer between your brush and the mask that you're of that levels adjustment. So when you paint over this intermediate, I guess, layer, your brush strokes are going to go in stronger where it's light and less where it's dark. So it's kind of like if you globally brush across your image, it's going to brush in like this, not just that 60% gray area or layer that we showed before, if that makes sense. So I'm going to just kind of do this. I select darks by using the Alt key and clicking on darks, and I come back here, click on the mask, and so you can see that this outline, these marching ants as they're called, are kind of highlighting the dark area. This isn't a precise mask. It is, again, it'll brush in stronger here, but out over here where it's lighter, not so much. I use Alt H to hide the ants when I'm editing, and so now I've got my brush and I've got 60%, and I'm going to sit here and just kind of edit and brush across these dark areas. And you can kind of brush everywhere, but you have to remember, if you are brushing in the light areas, at some point if you kept doing it and did level adjustments the way I did, you'll end up probably blowing it out, so you have to be a little careful. So here I am, I'm brushing this in, and this to me is taking your time with an image. You're basically painting it almost. You're painting these effects, and it's not precise. Like if you wanted to re-edit this one later, you would have a hard time with what you did already. You'd have a hard time repeating it. So here's what we did. We painted in that levels adjustment, and we make it invisible, and you can kind of see what we've done already. Just a little bit of contrast. So I'm going to hit Alt D, which deselects that mask, and I'm going to create another levels adjustment. And what I like to do is to try to keep it even. So I did the darks, and now it's kind of really light over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this level adjustment, and I'm going to drop down the exposure, basically looking at the areas where it's bright. That's what I'm going to target on for my next adjustment. So I'm going to invert that, and then I'm going to go and pick like the lights, maybe even the lights, because I don't want to like paint everything, but I'd like to target more of a smaller area. And again, it's not just targeting here, it will overlap, but the more focused you are on the specific parts, the less it will impact the others. So here I am, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to paint across this brighter area, maybe even in there a little bit, and especially in here where it's real bright, to try to bring this side of the image down a little bit. I'm going to paint in here just a tad too. Alright, we can see what we've done with just adding that, and how we've brought down the bright areas a decent amount. So deselect, and now I'm going to pick another. And so basically level adjustments are kind of doing this kind of compounded kind of editing over and over until you get to a place where you're happy. So I'm again targeting the shadows with this one. I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to go to my darks, and I'm going to keep brushing it. So I can leave the marching ants up this time. It kind of helps you kind of see where things are, but I usually will get rid of them because they kind of get in the way of what I'm doing. So getting rid of them here. I'm going to brush in the darks again. This thing is starting to pop with contrast, and you'll notice once I kind of finish this, and I'll show you that we haven't added any saturation, we haven't added vibrance, but look at the what we started with, kind of how flat it is into now, and how the color is starting to come out just based off of doing these level adjustments. So we don't even need really all the time to do vibrance and contrast, or so we don't really need to always do vibrance and saturation, because a lot of times this process will bring out the colors. So another thing we can do here is the foreground. Maybe it's getting a little dark. I can do one level adjustment just targeting the foreground. I'll bring it up, invert it. Let's see if our darks just take the foreground. So the darks are really kind of focused on just the foreground. So I'm going to pick that. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to shrink my brush up a little bit, and I'm just going to paint in the foreground a little bit. So you can see that we've brightened that up. And if you feel like you've overlapped the horizon, like maybe I overlapped that, I can invert my brush to black and then go back over this, just a smaller brush, and maybe go to 100% and then paint back in just across the horizon to make sure I have no overlapping stuff that makes, and you can hit the bracket, the reverse slash, not the forward slash, but the backslash, to kind of see where your mask is, and then that way you can go across the horizon and make sure it's not causing any like halo issues because you're painting in some weird effects. So press it again, it's gone. So you can see what we did there. And now I'm going to do another one for the sky. I'm going to bring down the sky a little more, and the brights. I'm going to go to my lights, my brush, back up to 60, and I'm going to paint in this again. I'm just going to keep doing this. Sometimes I get lazy and I don't want to do luminosity masking, because it is more of like a slightly time consuming process, but it also can get you really, really nice results. Sometimes I just want to go up to my filter and do camera raw filter and just boom, add contrast and all this stuff, and then be kind of done with it. What I'm worried about here is that I'm really hoping that this isn't a dust spot here and that it's just rain crashing down. It looks like it does look like that's probably what it is. So I'm a little worried about, I don't like dust spots. I don't like things that look like they're big dust spots, even if they're not. So you're going to do the levels again and up more contrast here. And doing these kind of level adjustments basically is just doing contrast. That's essentially what you're doing. I'm going to pick darks, go here with my brush, and just kind of keep painting it in here. I love this method. It's amazing what kind of just contrast and colors you can bring out of an image by just using this simple system. And I learned a lot of this from a guy named Zach Schnepp. He has tutorials up on his site, and he has a whole system. So here we go again. We've added that. That looks real good. Sometimes what happens is when you get multiple layers of level adjustments, you start getting weird, like you can see that there's some weird purple like fringing and stuff here, but when you zoom in, it's not there. It seems like Photoshop has a hard time with a lot of it. Now, one thing I've noticed, and I don't know if I've messed this up, but I feel like out here, like if I'm gonna highlight it, this part looks darker. So closer to the horizon, this feels dark, but out here it's really light. And And so I don't know if I have some kind of weird balance issue going on. So I'm going to take my levels and I'm going to make it a little darker, and then I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to go to my darks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to just evenly balance this out by taking my brush tool and just focusing on the front part of this to see if I can just darken up the very, very front of this. So that looks a little better to me. It looks a little more even. See how it was brighter, now it's like darker and it feels more balanced. It almost felt like I had a weird like gradient mask or something happening. So now we've got it a little darker. So I think it's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do is at this point, so I made all these level adjustments, I'm going to select all my levels and this first layer, and I'm going to duplicate them on the new layer button here, and then I'm going to Control E, or actually Alt E, to merge them all, and now I've got a new base layer. And so I'm going to come through here and look for dust spots again, because there's a dust spot, there's a dust spot, they're all showing up. My Sony A7R III just attracts dust like no one's business, and that's what I've heard, that the A7R IV is going to be exactly the same, if not worse. So they haven't really fixed that problem. It's unfortunate, because it definitely makes wanting to use them for time-lapse really hard. But for stills, you know, it just takes extra work to get rid of them. It's not the worst thing in the world. I'm sure I might have more hidden somewhere here. It's looking real good. What I might do, and what I do sometimes, I feel like my foreground is still really light here. I don't know. I'm probably being really paranoid about it, but I'm gonna try to do this one more time with the darks. I definitely am kind of picky about this stuff, so I want to make sure it's perfect and looks legitimate. So once again, we brought that down. You can see that that even looks better to me. So now like the whole foreground looks very, very even and balanced, because you can kind of see what it was like before, bright and then darker and then darker. So yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to I can't decide how much I'm going to push this image. I'm going to duplicate those and create a new layer. And I think at the end, sometimes I do like to do this. I go into this Camera Raw filter that's in the newer versions of Photoshop, and sometimes I just want to do just global stuff, you know, as a finish. Global contrast, maybe a little bit of shadows here. Bring it up, as long as it doesn't introduce halos. In one of my previous tutorials I talk about that. You just want to be careful. And you notice that we have not added vibrance or saturation at all. In fact, I'm going to hit OK here, and so this is what we kind of just did with just that global thing, which is really cool. But what I almost feel like is that the foreground is really either colorful or a little too vibrant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to go back into Filter, Camera Raw, and I am going to drop. That's too much, but I'm going to take the vibrance and drop it just to like -8. So let's see what it looks like here. So you can see if I make it invisible, it's just a slightly less color. I'm going to create a mask and invert it, and I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to go to like 40% because I don't want to bring in too much. And I'm just going to brush once over this. Now this is just the kind of psychosis to make sure that's perfect. It just felt like it was a little too much color. And so now you can see where we started and how flat and ugly the image is, to adding everything and where we are now. And again, we have not added saturation. We've not added vibrance. The only thing still sometimes to me is I feel like it's a little bright over here, but it's not a big deal. What I'm struggling with is my crop at this point, and so this is the part where it gets tricky, because if you crop it here in Photoshop, it's kind of hard to change it, or change it later. I think that the middle of the road is nice, and I like this part here as the middle, and so it's really hard to decide if that's if it's worth changing. I might like bring it down just a smidge like this. Let's see what it looks like. I don't know. It's not, the original crop isn't bad. I just can't decide where. See, I feel like when like this is the interesting part, and it's pushed to the right side of this a little bit. So if I go back to my crop, we're going to bring it down a little bit like this. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, see, I like that better because I feel like this is now centered more in the middle, which is a little more important. So if I hit undo, you know, there feels like there's kind of wasted stuff out over here, and now it's a little more compact and feels a little bit, a little more focused on this downburst and dust foot there. So, I think that's kind of it. I might go through again. Let's go through and look for little mistakes, anything we want to get rid of. You know, like sometimes you've got trash in a field that, you know, get rid of that crap. You know, if you got like a beer can or a water bottle or something that you didn't notice, you know, you need to get rid of that crap. I don't have any problem with making you know, fixes to these things. If you had some ugly power lines or whatever that really stand out, you know, try to get rid of them if you want. You know, don't. I think that there's a certain point that you can do too much and, you know, change the entirety of an image by doing lots of, you know, doing a composite and doing all this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of times where it's just it's a power line that goes across and you had no choice, but you had to stop there. And if you had a road, you would have gone on the other side, and you couldn't find one. And so, look at that. There's a lightning bolt up there. Huh. It's not really a bolt. It's a little filament, but I did not see that before. I'm just looking for last minute little hidden dust spots here. There, see, I think there's a faint one there. This is the kind of stuff that just the attention to detail. It's important, you know, if you value what you're doing and value your art and you want to sell prints. See this one? Missed that one. That's a decent sized one that I just have missed because I haven't been looking in the middle as much. If you value this stuff and you want to sell it, you want to make sure that you're giving people the most perfect product you can. There's another one there, tucked away. What I tend to do is I tend to notice dust spots are more on the edges of your sensor, and so I end up kind of like skirting the edges and then sometimes missing the ones in the middle. So man, I think that looks really, really cool. So what I'm going to do right now, just for fun, I'm going to bring up another image just to get the watermark off it, although that doesn't seem to be working, so let's try this one. I do this the long way. This is probably not the most ideal way to do a watermark, but this is how I do it because it's just how I do it. But I like to find my original image, find the watermark, copy it, paste it over here. And I usually like to put them the top middle, but the tough part with this image is if I do white, it's kind of hard to see. I like to use this hue saturation layer, and if I hold the some key, it's not Control, it's not Alt. I have my Windows keyboard with my Mac, and so it's the Windows key. I think it's Command or something, but if I hold it down and click, it applies just to this layer, and then I can take the saturation and I can turn it to dark, and so then it will make this black, the watermark black. And so I can take it and maybe drop it over here, which might look okay. Yeah, this is like a little tough. I don't want to like necessarily have it everywhere, or have it in a really weird spot. I think I might just put it up here because it's a little darker. Yeah, I think that's pretty decent. The thing is no matter where you put it, people can get rid of it. So you really just want to have something nice that has your name on it in case people keep it up and it gets passed around or whatever, so they know your name. Because that's real. This is about the simplest thing to get rid of on this image. So yeah. So we've got this. What I do is before I'm done with it, I'm gonna save it first, and it's probably gonna complain about how big the file size is with all these layers, so I tend to delete a lot of them before I save it. So we're gonna hit save. And now I'm back in Lightroom after we saved it, and I'm going to, what I do is I make my final image a 5-star file, and then I'm going to come in here and I mentioned this on a different tutorial, but I put in keywords for everything that I do. I'm gonna put in the lens information, the camera, Bianco Road where I shot this, monsoon. It's also a transition event. Downburst, dust, foot, microburst. It was a real strong downburst. Farms, roads, or dirt roads actually. Dirt roads, mountains, dust storm. And then I'm just gonna call it boot, because to me some of these just look like feet, like little toes, like boots. And I'm going to write a description: a strong downburst south of State 8 along Bianco Road kicks up some dust, which eventually became a haboob, because it did. This storm here, plus maybe a few others, this was so strong it exploded out this downburst, and then this dust foot eventually became this out here later. So a decent wall of dust occurred because of that storm and a couple others that consolidated their outflow boundaries, and we kicked up this big wall of dust. So what I do is I have it a preset for exporting to my storm chasing gallery, and so sometimes I just do it here just to have it there. It's not a big deal to do it, but I just scrolled like crazy. But before I post on social media, I'm going to run it through this Raya Pro panel where I sharpen it for 2048, and that's going to make it look really, really good online compared to just exporting it to 2048 through Lightroom. So open this back up in Photoshop. So this is the Raya Pro panel, and it has a sharpen and resize for the web, and I just do 2048, boom, and it's going to go through and create a new file, and it's going to sharpen it, and I'm going to convert it to sRGB so it looks good online. And you can see, kind of probably hard to see, but if I viewed it at 100%, which it is, I guess, it looks really good and really nice and sharp. If you zoom in, it's not going to look as good because it's very pixelated, because we're using, a sharpened copy compared to, like, here's the actual file, and you can see how good it looks compared to like this all pixelated. That's because this is sharpened specifically to look really good online. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to save as, and I'm going to go to my storm chasing gallery, click the file that I kind of exported from Lightroom before, change it to JPEG, save it, high quality, boom, done. So that's kind of our image, and that's basically using luminosity masking almost exclusively to edit something. And it just gets you better, cleaner, more natural looking edit than just using contrast and clarity and kind of these things in Lightroom. Even if you come here, you can use one of these and just do brightness and contrast and keep doing contrast over and over as well. So I don't usually use the contrast stuff in Photoshop. I like to use the levels and taking my time to kind of get it nice and evenly balanced. And you notice that, it's very clean and very unnatural looking, even though, where we started looked like that and very plain. But in person, I know that it looked more like this. It was very, very cool. It was very like awe-inspiring, and I feel like luminosity masking and this way of editing gets you something a lot more natural looking. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter. And I also put some links below to Tony Kuiper and also to Zach Schnepp if you want to learn more about luminosity masking, or if you want some this Raya Pro panel for sharpening. So, all right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again.